Okay, second news story of the week, and amazing news, everyone. Nintendo has actually confirmed that there is going to be a Switch successor after denying it for so long, literally denying it, even when they were showing it at
Yes.
Gamescom. They have announced that there will be an announcement for their next generation system within this financial year, which I believe takes us up to April 25. So they've said, yes, we'll announce something in the next year. There was an investor call which did follow up with some details, and it's interesting just in the way it's been positioned here. So, for example, it's being described as a successor to the Switch, which, on the face of it, duh. But when you sort of compare it to previous announcements, I'm looking at a tweet thread here from Oatmeal Dome. Yes, Nintendo says the next generation Switch will be a quote-unquote successor to the Switch, but when you look at what they described their previous machines as, Switch, new hardware with a brand new concept, Wii U, a system to succeed Wii, 3DS, new portable game machine to succeed the Nintendo DS system, which kind of it sort of suggests that we're getting another Switch, right? There are some various technical details that have also emerged through some sleuthing on the Famiboards forum, but we'll get onto that in a minute. John, thoughts on the actual Nintendo disclosures?
I mean, it's rather unlike them, I guess, to address this stuff usually, but it does feel very modern Nintendo to just sort of share a little bit of information, but ultimately say very little, because none of this is a surprise, right? But it's, at least to me, it almost feels like they're saying stop asking us about this. Our upcoming presentations are not about this. Yes, there's something coming. Just wait. You know what I mean? If it feels like it's coming from a place of impatience, just to settle down. Maybe the fans, shareholders, everyone.
You're quite
relax.
right, John, because the announcement that was made was basically a non-announcement. We are not going to be announcing the Switch successor at our June Nintendo Direct.
It's don't expect it. It's not coming.
But
there is something, but it's not ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts on this?
The successor thing is curious because to just pull an old historical thing. Well, what's the gimmick? Is the proposition of a more powerful Switch, but it just does all the Switch things, just with better graphics and potentially higher frame rate. Is that enough of a selling point to differentiate it enough from the previous product to make people buy it that have already bought it before, and also to get a new audience to grow a bit? I don't know how important that is for a Japanese company, the whole new audience thing. But so from the description of it as a successor, it seems like it is more iterative as a result. But then I go back and I look at the Wii U, and they did try a gimmick there. It was very unsuccessful for the larger selling of consoles part. But I'm curious to see if there's something like the Wii U, or are we getting to get a GameCube kind of situation where the GameCube is just a really good console, and it's a way better N64. A way better N64, but it didn't grow and it didn't shock and awe like the Switch or the Wii did, which were radically different. So I'm very curious exactly to see if there's a Wii U gimmick in there that we still don't know about, or if this is just a GameCube. I don't know. That's curious.
Okay. You just can't say, can you? Really?
I can't say.
All of the evidence suggests that it is a successor to the Switch with a Switch-like concept, and I'm not sure how you could evolve that concept significantly when your machine has to be a mobile front and center.
They shouldn't. I think this needs to be very similar to the original Switch, because I think the Switch is the model that Nintendo always wanted.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because they've had success in handhelds and consoles, but especially handhelds. This was finally the point where they were able to combine them, and now their developers could focus on the one platform. And that turned out to be just the best possible thing for them. They're not going to walk that back. And that's great. The language though does feel guarded because the Switch has been so successful. It reminded me of when they called the DS the quote unquote third pillar, I believe, where it was like, it had this air of, this might work. We're not getting rid of the Game Boy line just yet. You know, we just have this other thing here. We're going to try it. And then when it was clear that it was a gigantic success, which did take a little bit of time, then it was like, oh yeah, we're all in on this now. You know what I mean? So maybe they're like, yeah, you know, we have another Switch kind of coming. That doesn't mean, but still buy the old Switch. It's still good. We're still making stuff for it. Because they've basically sold, they're one of the best selling consoles of all time now with the Switch. It's knocking on the door and maybe it's surpassed the PS2 at this point. Need to double check. It's insane, those numbers. I actually didn't think it was possible to get those numbers these days. It's pretty impressive. But at the same time, and this is why I'm sure it's taking them so long, like there's always that risk during the transition, and Nintendo famously has struggled with this. It's like, how do you actually keep that audience? How do you get them interested in that new machine? Do they feel betrayed? Like, they don't want to lose that audience, but they can't focus. They still need to move ahead somehow. So I suspect that there's a lot of concern about that strategy because the current leadership hasn't launched a new console before.
Yeah.
This is going to be their first shot at it. And they're coming off of Nintendo's most successful overall platform ever. I mean, the DS, I think, is still ahead, maybe numbers wise, but it's kind of a different thing somewhat. And you were talking about expanding the audience. That was obviously their MO for the Wii and the DS. They now have that audience, and they still have that audience. And I feel like the Switch was this perfect middle ground where it actually it appealed to both the people that love traditional games, but also the people they got during the Wii and the DS era. And it kind of brought everybody on board. So I don't know that there's necessarily that many more people to capture, and I'm not sure that they need to. Right. Nor do they want to. Like, I think they want that Nintendo audience, and I don't think they're saying, well, we got to get in and capture all of the mobile players. We got to get the free-to-play money. We got to get live service money. We need to get everybody else. They seem pretty happy with their audience type, right. And they've got their sizable niche. I say niche, I mean it's a ton of people playing it, but it's still, when you look at the overall market and you take into things like Roblox and such, it is kind of still a little bit of a niche.
Well, we talk about expanding the audience, and I think what Nintendo did spectacularly well was to actually combine their mobile and home console audiences into one, and the results have been nothing short of exceptional. And I think that, you know, they probably did expand their overall audience because the Switch as a concept is irresistible. You know, great games that you can take anywhere. You don't need to be stuck in your living room, or, you know, you can take that machine anywhere. You can play it anywhere, even within the home, I think has huge value. So
also, just a lot of friends of mine that don't play video games much, they really aren't interested that much in video games. They all have a Switch. It's not the focus of their lifestyle or anything, but it's something where they're like, yeah, you know, I'll just play it on Switch. Like, everybody's fully aware of the Switch. They're on board with the Switch. It has that mass market like penetration that's so important to getting those numbers.
Yeah. The other thing is, it's, you know, being able to use it anywhere. It's found great utility with like parents, you know, and it's just, what can I say? It's just been remarkable to see people that I used to sort of consider gamers who drifted out of it come back in because of the Switch, and you know, the fact that it was almost, in a sense, you know, good, clean fun as well. You know, the quality of Nintendo games has never really faltered. And, you know, that concept plus those games is just irresistible to those people as well. So, you know, I think you're right, John. They don't really need to do that much more with Switch 2 other than to create a more modern system, and that will carry that business model forward. And, you know, it's all going to come down to the flow of great games, which I think is going to be challenging because, as we've often said in the past, Switch effectively had the benefit of 2 generations worth of Nintendo first-party games, because the Wii U ones could just be refactored for Switch. But yeah, I guess from that we should move on to the disclosures that have come from Famiboard's detective work. These guys have been basically tracking the progress of the Switch via various leaks. And yeah, obviously there was, Linux disclosures. There was the NVIDIA leak. We did a video on the T239 processor. A lot of that sort of detective work produced that video. And the detective work continues through the form of shipping manifests, where these guys are actually tracking publicly available documents. So let's be clear here. It's not a leak, right? Nothing is being leaked. It's public. And, they've figured out the code words used for various pieces of technology, but there are some instances where T239, the main chip in Switch 2, is just described as a T239, which makes things a lot easier. But now, the recent shipping manifests have actually given like a sort of part-by-part guide to what's in the new console, and even some dimensions. So people have actually created their own sort of projected Switch 2 shells based on those dimensions. The couple of things that have come out, though, that have been highlighted is essentially that the memory subsystem seems to be better than expected. There's talk of LPDDR5X modules running at 7,500 megatransfers per second. Two of those, 6GB modules, have been identified, which suggests 12 gigs in the final shipping unit. Also, 256 gigs of fast, I think it's UFS memory, which, that's quite interesting because, the Switch 2 is going to need something faster than traditional NAND and probably faster than SD cards as well. We've got this question here from Green Swede. Alleged Switch quote-unquote 2 leaks from manufacturing starting to pop up. Alleges will have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM. Assuming that this information is accurate, does 12 gigabytes sound like a good enough amount of RAM for developers, considering that Series X and PS5 are using 16? Would developers have to make more obvious development sacrifices for multi-platform Switch 2 releases?
Wow.
I'd say no, because 12 gigs is more than Series S. And, the bandwidth from LPDDR5X, it's going to come in at something like 128 gigs per second, assuming they're running at full speed, of course, which is actually which is not guaranteed. But that's a lot of bandwidth for that processor. And, in terms of developers who are targeting Switch specifically, they're going to work to produce the best results with what they're given. And, you can't really... Nobody's really been complaining about texture work on first-party Switch titles, so I think it'll just be fine for Switch 2. I feel
regarding the RAM though, just even if it's not used to its full potential, it still seems like a gigantic upgrade from the original Switch, which was truly hamstrung by poor memory bandwidth and other memory-related issues, right?
Yeah.
It's good for what it is, but that is a key pain point that a lot of developers had to deal with, and this should at least alleviate that significantly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about it in terms of just like Switch 2 things that we want it to do. One of the things about scaling to a higher res using DLSS is that you still actually have a pretty intense memory cost to doing it, because you want to keep the textures at the MIP level and resolution of the output resolution, and that will require more memory. And I think actually them going for more memory fits really well into the idea that Switch 2, when put in its docking base, is actually going to be scaling up to reasonable resolutions on a 4K set. I don't want to say 4K there at all, but I think this helps the situation out a lot, and I'm happy to see it. I'm also very curious as a result of the memory situation, because it is an NVIDIA processor. Like ray tracing, we know, is very expensive, but it also has a larger memory cost. And it's been one of the reasons why, for example, I think Doom Eternal is like a cited one, where I think we can say probably the Series S has the oomph to do the light ray tracing that game has from a GPU shading and compute perspective, but it probably didn't have the memory to do it without large sacrifices to things like texture quality, maybe, where it would be dubious to actually make that trade-off. And I think the Switch could produce a better looking version of Doom Eternal than the Series S in that perspective, maybe. Who knows? But I'm very curious to see, because looking at that memory situation, we've seen such incredible compromises at times to texture quality on Series S games, where I just go I don't know. I feel like they could have done better is what I feel like sometimes. But I feel like Switch could actually have a situation as a result of that memory where you get better texture quality than a Series S game. And I find that exciting. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I would guard against the Series S comparisons. I'm seeing a lot of, this is somewhere between PS4 Pro and Series S.
Oh, yeah.
Just be careful on all of that stuff, because you can't apply that rationale to, well, I guess you could in a way to Steam Deck, but, that's using a much higher power budget. I'd just be concerned about sort of setting expectation levels for that. I think ultimately the Switch 2 just needs to address the primary issue with Switch 1, which is that, connected to a living room display, it just doesn't look that good. It's great as a handheld, but it doesn't really work as a home console. Now, maybe DLSS to 1080p or 1440p plus, standard upscaling could actually make a big difference there. And if you look back at my T239 testing, that did seem to be the case there. And it actually has more memory bandwidth seemingly now than what I was projecting there. So, fingers crossed. I think ultimately, though, it is going to be all about the games, and Nintendo just don't disappoint there. It does seem to be the case that the delay was down to the fact that software wasn't ready, which, maybe that's the case. Maybe it's the fact that Switch is still doing incredibly well.
Hey, we can't even call it a delay, really, because nothing was officially
never
delayed, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we're waiting on tenterhooks for the next series of leaks on Switch 2, proper leaks this time. But I'm quietly excited about it,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing about the leaks that I was that we still don't know a lot about is the screen. There was a lot in the leaks that talked about, the fact that we got the memory in there, that's very interesting. But we still don't know a lot about the screen.
Yep.
OLED, VRR, resolution.
Yep.
They're all kind of unknowns still. Yeah, refresh rate, right. And, they make tiny screens that are very good these days. So there's an incredible, you can go all the way down to OG Steam Deck quality up to, VRR OLED quality. There's a lot of variability there.
I think ultimately it's a cost thing.
Yeah, I think it is going to be LCD for sure. It's going to be a Samsung LCD, I bet.
And maybe there'll be an OLED model later on, because
that's exactly what I'm thinking. Nintendo loves their hardware revisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that will be an excuse to roll out a new model. And the OLED, the SWOLED was, the upgrade felt so much larger than it actually was because of the screen.
Yeah.
I just hope that if they're using LCD, LCDs can look okay. I'm very hard on them, but a good LCD can still look pretty awesome. The problem is the original Switch used a very bad LCD. It was not a good quality. And, maybe it was a little better maybe than the original Steam Deck, which was one of the worst I've seen in the last decade. But still, I hope that if they go LCD, the LCD is at least of decent quality.